Brandi Leifso, welcome. Welcome everyone to episode 5 of the Human to Human podcast. Really excited today to introduce and interview for the next hour or so, Brandi Leifso, and the mandatory bio that I like to give, and then we're going to dive right in, is Brandi is the CEO and founder of Evio Beauty. So they're a skincare cosmetics line. They were founded in 2019, and they're a Canadian beauty company, which is really cool. The Canadian beauty company focused on all things cosmetics and skincare, making products that are affordable, inclusive, vegan, cruelty-free, toxin-free, gluten-free, paraben-free, all these words that were once kind of foreign to me that all now remotely make sense, or at least somewhat make sense more than ever before. The other thing I'll say is that what we're going to talk about today, we're going to dive right into conversations about how to create strategic partnerships with multi-billion-dollar brands, the importance of building a community around your product and service, and one of my favorite topics, the differences between having resources and being resourceful. So Brandi, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Karan. I'm really excited about today.
I am really excited as well. And for anyone listening to this live right now, please join us in the comments, ask your questions. The beautiful thing about the majority of the Human to Human podcast episodes is that we do them live. We do them live, unfiltered, right there on the spot. We've already got somebody watching who is excited to hear us. Welcome, Alka, to the show. We're excited to have you here as well. So Brandi, why don't we start? Let's just dive in. Tell us a little bit about kind of who you are today and what brought you here.
Yeah, so Evio, I know the bio that you read is a little bit misleading because we weren't really my entrepreneurial career didn't start in 2019. It started really in 2012, but my current brand started in 2019. And you left out all the juicy parts of the bio, the more exciting parts of it. So I'll share kind of how I started. So in 2012, I was actually living in a women's shelter, and I was there due to domestic violence. And so while I was there, I just needed to pass time and distract myself from what was happening in my everyday life. And so I found myself on my laptop and taught myself how to use Photoshop on YouTube. And I then Photoshopped an entire catalog of made-up products that didn't exist, and then shopped that catalog around to local boutiques of this completely fictional products, and made enough pre-sales to then bootstrap this company, start to employ women in the shelter and get back on my feet, and grew the company from $15 in my pocket living in the shelter to a $15 million valuation in 2018. And and then we kind of just keep learning and growing and pivoting and finding new ways to innovate in the green beauty space, and how to keep the passion alive.
So let me stop right here already. I do apologize. I definitely missed some of the key parts of the bio. And I think the reason I left that out is you've got such a unique story. You've got such a fascinating story. I know a lot of people know it and a lot of people don't. I love hearing it from you. I don't like putting my own spin on it. I don't like my own perspective. But let's get into, so you were in a woman's shelter, going through domestic violence at the time, and you found yourself in a really unfavorable position. You had $15 and a laptop. What drew you to, first of all, just like what kind of drew you to beauty, number one? What was going through your head in that time? Because I don't know what it's like to be in that environment. Just walk me through what was going through your head and kind of how you found that courage and the drive to not give up before you've even started.
That's a great question. And honestly, you can connect the dots looking back. But in the moment, I don't really have the answer to that. You can connect the dots looking back and be like, oh, this is what drove me. This is what led me to beauty. This is what led me to this. But at the end of the day, in those moments when you are in survival mode, you're not thinking strategically. You're not even thinking logically. And so really kind of walking through what that process looked like. I lived in a shelter called, I'm having some crazy hair. I lived in a shelter called a Safe House in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And so safe houses are specifically there for women who are fleeing human trafficking or rape or domestic violence. And so when you move into this house, it's like a lockdown house, and most of these shelters are at capacity all the time. I wish I could say that my story is unique, and I wish I could say that not many women experience what I did, but the truth of it is that here in Canada, 100,000 women every year are living in shelters. My story, sadly, isn't that unique. My outcome is unique. And I think, with Evio, kind of that process. So I was living in the shelter, and I moved into the shelter and was living in this house with 30 other women. And there was one bathroom. And so I'm sure you can imagine 30 women in a house, all experiencing a lot of trauma and moving through their own processes. I shared a room with another woman as well, and there was one empty bunk in our room too, which another woman moved into shortly afterwards. But you are constantly around people. And so that moment that you have to yourself in the washroom is very brief and very sacred. And another interesting thing, so connecting all of those dots, just that moment that I had alone to myself to put on my makeup, to put myself together, really meant a lot to me. I was already interested in makeup prior to that moment in my life. So naturally, I definitely gravitated towards that, but also recognizing how different all of us were in the shelter. Out of 30 women, all of us were so different, but experiencing the same thing. And what was really fascinating to me was I was constantly told from volunteers, shelter workers, and other people, Brandi won't be here for long. She's got it figured out. She won't be here for long. And in the moment, that really tore me apart because I felt as if people had different expectations of me than they had of other people. And I couldn't figure out why. And what I really recognized the difference was the way I carried myself, the way I presented myself. I took the time to put my makeup on because it felt like my shield and my armor. And because I was taking those actions, people perceived, because of the way that I looked, that I wouldn't be there for long. And therefore they treated me like I wouldn't be there for long. And because they treated me like I wouldn't be there for long, I felt like I can't be there for long. And that really changed my outcome. And it changed also the way that I looked at social change. And that really shaped Evio for me. And Evio really came from a place of wanting social justice and wanting to have a platform, to have a voice. And all of those things that I just described led me to beauty. But then what took it one step further is then when I started understanding more about the beauty industry, I learned that at that time in 2012, there were very few women in the game. It was predominantly older white men who were operating these beauty companies, which they understood how to do business. They had never tried the product. And I thought that that was really interesting. And I thought that there was room for a young, relatable, down-to-earth person to be able, I'd like to describe myself that way, I hope it's the truth, but to be able to truly represent and embody these products that I use every single day that have had such an impact on my life. And so, so I set out to the streets with this made up fake catalog and started making sales. And it just took off from there.
That's amazing. Okay, I've got so many questions. The first is, what was it really like about the way you presented yourself that made all the other women in the shelter have that notion of, okay, I don't think Brandi's going to be here long. Like there's something unique about her, or there's something different about her. That's kind of the first question. It's like, what made that uniqueness, I guess? Like, why was it so clear to other people that you weren't going to be in the system? And then the second question is, I know you said there was 30 women in the bathroom, and that time, or 30 women, one bathroom, that time to yourself was very sacred. You enjoyed it. Was that the inspiration, like, to go beauty, as like in terms of like what was it about cosmetics and beauty and not apparel or sneakers?
Great question. So to answer the first question about not being there for long, I mean, again, I can connect the dots looking back, but I have no idea why they would have felt that way. But what I can connect the dots now looking back at, which has also, again, changed my perspective of social change and changed my perspective of how the world operates to some degree. And yeah, the way that I look at it now is that I think that they felt that way because I carried myself differently because of a slew of life experiences that led me there in the first place. So this was not my first time living in a shelter. The first time I lived in a shelter, I was a child. And so I had that experience previously. And 70% of children who grow up in homes with violence or with challenging circumstances, 70% of those children end up replicating that in their adult life and their adult relationships because they've normalized it. And so I am no different to that. I fell into that statistic of 70%, although I thought never in a million years would I, as an adult, carry out my childhood. But it's so ingrained in your genes and in your DNA when that's been your life experience and that's what you've normalized, that's the statistic that I fell into. But along with that, I also left school in grade 9. And I mention that because connecting the dots looking back, whether this is actually what made the difference in the way that I carried myself in the circumstances of living in a house with 30 women who were all going through trauma. I don't know if this is true or not, but the dot that I can connect looking back is I left school in grade 9. And grade 9 is when things really switch for girls, especially going through high school, going through bullying, going through puberty, getting to know yourself, starting to wear makeup, starting to see trends, starting to want to follow those trends, starting to fit in with the crowd, wanting to fit in, wanting to be a part of a tribe. And I never experienced that because I left school in grade 9. And so I didn't really know or relate to the importance of fitting in with the tribe. I didn't really relate to women bullying women. I didn't really relate to a lot of those things that I think get ingrained through society to young women nowadays. And so because of not having that experience, I think I carried myself a little bit differently. And I think that was a big reason why they were like, Brandi won't be here for long, because I didn't embed myself in kind of the culture of really, fitting in with the crew, because I had never experienced that in my life before. So it wasn't something I sought to do.
So your norm, like, quite frankly, at a young age was already so different than the traditional way that I would have grown up or my sister would have grown up. It was very different. So why beauty? What drew you to beauty?
You know what? That's another thing that's really interesting. And again, too, like, you can only connect the dots looking back. Like, why podcast? Why, human relationships? And so I can say for beauty, the thing that actually interests me about beauty isn't makeup. It's not the artistry of makeup, although I have so much respect for that. But I'm sure that you can tell, like, I don't wear a ton of makeup. I have mascara on, which we just launched today. And I have some concealer on, and that's it. And really, though, what fascinates me is the psychology around it, and the psychology also of how it played a part in people thinking I wouldn't be there for long, or the psychology of how it makes you feel. Recently, actually, on the Evio guide, our blog online, there was an article that was written by Marina R., and she talks about a study that Harvard did where they actually tracked the results of women who went into exams wearing makeup and women who went into exams not wearing makeup. Both had the same average grades. They had similar IQs, or however you would frame it. But those who went in wearing makeup across the board anonymously scored higher. And that's fascinating to me. And the difference was going in with more confidence. And the psychology that makeup plays within that is so fascinating to me. And that transformation, that life transformation, that breaking your norms, that always challenging yourself and always trying to become a better version of yourself, getting to know yourself better, all of these different things is so fascinating to me. I think that's a part of the reason of life, is to get to know yourself well enough to be able to contribute to the greater good of society. And I think that the way you contribute to the greater good of society is through multiple things, but a big part of it is you showing up as the best version of yourself. And when you show up as the best version of yourself, you can give more, or you can consume more. You have more capacity to be kind and conscious to others. And it's a constant evolution of that. Because, one day you might wake up feeling great and the next day you wake up and you're not feeling great. It's part of being human. But how makeup can make a consistent effort to help you feel your best, to do your best, to be kinder, to be more conscious, is really fascinating to me. And it really lent itself to me in some of the hardest moments of my life.
That's so fascinating, the psychology behind like self-confidence and how you perceive yourself in the mirror. It's oftentimes, we have one idea of who's looking back at us in the mirror. Your parents have a different idea of what they see. Your partner has a different idea of what they see. Your sister has a different idea of what they see. Mm-hmm. You've got your own little world of what you see in the mirror and how you show up. You probably have your own perspective of how you see yourself on podcasts or live streams like this. There's so many moving pieces. There's actually this book called Psycho-Cybernetics. The author is Maxwell Maltz, and there's a fascinating study within that book about plastic surgery patients and how they often explain that these plastic surgery patients were, let's say they wanted to get rid of some sort of what they would call like a deformality, something that they didn't appreciate about themselves. They would go get the surgery and they would find that some people had no change. They still saw themselves having the same, quote, deformity, even though like it was taken care of from a medical procedure standpoint, it had been addressed, it had been resolved, but mentally they still saw their old selves. Now there's also like the other psychology is where, people go get plastic surgery and they come out on the other side and they might look the exact same, but just a tweak in their brain makes them think that they've now overcome whatever that barrier was. It's so fascinating.
Absolutely. I mean, is the way that we look at ourselves plays so much effect in the way that we interact, the way that we interact in relationships, the conversations that we have with ourselves. Actually, a question that you told me ages ago is one that really sticks with me, that I think is really relative to beauty and aesthetics, and is the person that you talk to most in the day is yourself. What conversation are you having with yourself? And I think that that's really fascinating. And to your point, that conversation doesn't necessarily change because of your aesthetics or the way you look, but it can certainly lend a part to that. So for example, I was just saying before the podcast, I have this pimple that's driving me insane. And if right now I didn't put concealer on and now I was looking at myself in this podcast, all I'd be able to see is this pimple, although no one else would see it. No one else would care. Mm-hmm. And I didn't put the concealer on for anybody else. I put that concealer on for my own damn self. And I think that that's something that's often confused in society as well, is that people think that you're looking a certain way to be presenting yourself a certain way to society, mm-hmm. when that isn't necessarily the case, because the most important conversation, the most important perception that's occurring is the one that you have of yourself. If you think you're bad, you will be bad. If you think you're a criminal, you will be a criminal. If you think that that you're poor and that's just, you grew up poor and that's just who you're going to be, that's just what your destiny is, you will fulfill that destiny. But if you start telling yourself that, I'm not going to be here for long, I'm not going to be in the shelter for long. And sometimes it takes someone else telling you that too. So same thing with aesthetics as well. It sometimes takes someone telling you that you're beautiful for you to be like, oh, damn, yeah, I am. And it changes the conversation that you're having with yourself. And it's not about the makeup that you put on. It's about the conversation, and that conversation didn't necessarily happen because, you put on your mascara and your concealer. It happened because of the way somebody perceived you, and beauty isn't perceived because you got all glammed up. So it's a really interesting dynamics to it. And I love that you brought up the plastic surgery aspect, because how many times do you also hear of kind of relating it to other tangible things like lottery winners? You win.
I was just thinking about that as you were speaking. Yeah.
So like you win the lottery, or anytime you don't even win the lottery, but you say it's like arrival syndrome. You say, when I have the money, and this is a good segue into resources and resourcefulness too, that you say, when I have the money, or, when I have that surgery, or when I have, when I'm all glammed up, or when I'm this, or when I'm that. We have this arrival syndrome that we think that there's a solution to these things, and there isn't. The solution is within, and it takes a lot of work, and it's not fixed by, having a surgery. It's not fixed by the aesthetic aspects of it, but the aesthetics aspects of it can help you work through it.
Absolutely. And I do want to get into resources versus resourcefulness, but I want to pick it up where we left off. First of all, we've got a question that I want to answer from a gentleman named Shabs. But he said, being human and how we look at ourselves is so important. Where did the name Evio originate?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Shabs. This is so cool how they pop up. I love it. And so Evio actually originated so when I originally started my company, it was actually originally called Karma Face Cosmetics. I'm sure that you can make the connection of the pun there. And then due to trademark infringements and not understanding what that was while I was living in the shelter, it turned to Evelyn Iona, which was a friend's middle name and my middle name. My middle name's Iona, and her middle name was Evelyn. And eventually, no one could say Iona. We got all sorts of names. So eventually, it got squished together, and hence the first two letters of each name. So it's Evio.
I love it. So Shabs, thanks for asking that question. So Brandi, I want to pick off where we left off earlier on. So you bootstrapped the company. You were able to pre-sell many units of product in your, quote, year one, so to speak. Let's fast forward to some of the other key milestones in that Evio journey. So that was, you said, what, 5 years ago was the shelter, 5-6 years ago?
It was 7 years ago now.
So 7 years ago. So fast forward to 2018, 2017. I know your story. So I know that there's some really cool opportunities came your way. And in particular, an acquisition or a partial acquisition of your company. I'd love to talk about how that came to be, how that opportunity came to be. And if you could just explain like how you were able to negotiate a deal with a multi-billion-dollar entity from just a couple of years ago, living in a shelter with almost nothing, to now negotiating some of these insane strategic partnerships. Like, talk to us about, there's such a big gap there. I want to know what was in the middle of all of that.
Honestly, I think that's what interests people in Evio and in my story more than anything is they're like, what, there's a huge gap. What happened here? So that's a great question. The gap really just came with a lot of hard work. And actually to bring it back to year one, in year one of Evelyn Iona, I did $18,000 worth of sales. That was it. And so
I just want to stop there for a sec. So year one, $18,000 worth in sales, and that was 7 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So we think about business owners now, and this is for anyone listening who's either a business owner or is aspiring to start your own business, or whether it's your year one of business, or whether you're like I don't know anything about finances and how am I going to actually sell, like $18,000. Most people would say, okay, year one was okay, $18,000, not what I expected. You know what? Maybe I'm not meant for this. Maybe I'm not cut out for this entrepreneur thing. Maybe this is just not the path. Maybe my life is elsewhere. $18,000 today in 2020, if you think about making $18,000 in your first year operating as a business, from a commercial, from a what people think standpoint, like there's such a
poverty line.
Right? There's such a interesting perspective of like what entrepreneurs make, or how much they make, or where they make their money. But really what I'm just saying is like so many people would have given up after making $18,000 in 365 days, saying, oh my God, I just worked my ass off for $18,000. Like, I'm out. So I just want to say like kudos to you for sticking to it. Because that is, I'm sure you've went through a lot of defeats, a lot of rejections, a lot of no's, like many more no's than yeses. So just like kudos to you for like pushing past that, because if you had given up in year one, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation today.
No one would be interested. No one would be interested in having the conversation, I don't think. Because like you mentioned before, what's really interesting is that big gap. And so, the first year one was $18,000. And then as we progressed, kind of our first big break was actually Ipsy, is a subscription box that was originally founded by Michelle Phan, who is a YouTuber. She was kind of the original OG of makeup YouTube fame. And something also to bring into consideration as well that I didn't mention, which is one of my favorite facts about the beauty industry, is that it is the most watched thing on the internet, at least that we're willing to talk about. The number one most watched thing on the internet is pornography. Number two is makeup. So just let that sink in for a second, just how powerful and vocal the beauty industry is. And so for me, part of the reason why I was able to persevere was because it wasn't about the money to me. It was about having a voice and a community. It was about having something that stood for something. It was really my way of protesting. It was my way of protesting a broken system that I had fallen victim to twice. Although I hate the word victim, but I had fallen into twice in the patterns of that. The increased empathy of that as well, because I never thought I'd be a part of that 70% statistic. And when I became a part of it, I had so much more empathy and understanding as to why most people continue on that path in life. And so that fed me more to want to change the system, to want to have a voice, to want to change that outcome, to not continue to fall into those statistics, and to also be my own inspiration and my own hero, and hopefully one day be inspiration for someone else, another young woman experiencing the same things I do. So she has somebody to look to saying, no, you know what, my outcome's going to be different because hers was. And I think the more that we start seeing that, the more frequent it happens. And then the conversation in society starts changing, which loops back to what we were talking about before, that once that conversation is changing, the outcomes start changing. And so if there's hopefully one day nobody wants to talk about my story anymore, I know I've succeeded in my goal when no one wants to talk about my story, because my story is no longer an anomaly. When those who have experienced the things that I have the same outcomes I do. And in that moment, then I have succeeded, because right now the only reason why anyone wants to talk to me is because my outcome is different. And so kind of bringing that full circle, our first big break was Ipsy, where Michelle Phan purchased 250,000 samples of our concealer in the color Flawless in our Evelyn Iona line. And that was for a subscription box. So then they sent those subscription boxes out to 250,000 people who then tried our product, who then came back to our website, and a number of them purchased. And so that was kind of our first big break. And
what did that feel like getting a purchase order of that magnitude? Like, just walk me through kind of I'm sure you could think of that moment today and where you were, kind of what was going through your head, oh my God, did this just happen? Just walk me through a little bit of how you felt in that moment.
I had just moved to Toronto because I was like, I am leaving my old life behind. I'm ready to start new beginnings. I'm ready to, I'm ready for this new challenge in my life. And I'm ready to move forward and be happy. And so I moved to Toronto. And when I got this call, I was just through the roof, and immediately said yes, not even knowing what the word supply chain meant. I'm not even sure I knew what the word entrepreneur, I didn't no understanding of this process at all at that point. And so I was just immediately like, yes. And then all of a sudden I was like, damn, I have to figure out how to manufacture 250,000 concealers, not to mention have to figure out how to finance that, among so many other things. So I have to be completely honest. My first shipment was a bust. I was late on manufacturing. I didn't know how to communicate it. I was scared to communicate it. I was, I was a hot mess. And it took me a couple more large orders to stop being a hot mess, to be completely frank. Logistics was not my strong suit. And I didn't understand manufacturing. I couldn't afford the manufacturing. So what I actually did was, at that time we were manufacturing in Florida. I flew down to Florida. I couldn't afford having an entire assembly line. So I said, can you reduce the cost of each product if I work the assembly line with them? That takes one salary off, and hopefully we can trickle that down to save a couple pennies per product, because a couple pennies on large orders means a lot. Mm-hmm. And so I ran the assembly line. I stood on the assembly line. I filled, I bottled, I did the caps. I did anything that I needed to do to save a penny. And I did that for a couple of different runs, and so that I could see those orders through.
That is mind-blowing. That is mind-blowing. Like, wow. I mean, the word perseverance comes to mind. The word just like, perseverance. Like, you had a mission, you had this opportunity, and you weren't going to let it slip away. And you took everything in your power, and you just found a way to get it done. That is just wow. That's incredible.
And at that time too, I mean, I had no money. And so me even booking a flight to Florida was like every penny that I had. I became so used to my bank account fluctuating from $250,000 or $500,000 to 10 cents. And not knowing how I was going to feed myself. But because also of the experience of living in a shelter and having those experiences, nothing scared me anymore. Like, it doesn't scare me to only have, like, my risk meter mm-hmm. is broken, because I've lived in an experience where I don't know where my next meal is coming from. I've lived in an experience of being unsafe. I've lived in a shelter, and it goes on so many different things in life. But I actually read a quote on your Instagram recently that said, like, put yourself in the worst case scenario. Do you know the quote I'm talking about? So, like, you shared it. So, like, put yourself in your worst case scenarios, or like make your biggest fears come true so that you no longer fear them. Well, there's not much more to fear after experiencing some of those things in life. And so those risk factors just didn't matter to me anymore. Flying down to Florida and only having 10 cents in my account, not knowing where my next meal was coming from, and, just having to make it work, not even having a place to stay when I get there, didn't scare me anymore. And I'm so grateful to that nativity and to having had those hard circumstances, mm-hmm. because if I didn't, I probably would have been too scared to do it.
Yeah, it's almost like you didn't know any better. So you're like, whatever, like, what's the worst that could happen? And you didn't know any better. And actually, in a way, that probably benefited you, because like a traditional entrepreneur, a traditional business owner would kind of weigh out like the pros, the cons. They'd really map it out. Well, how is this going to impact? How am I going to make cash flow work? There's so many reasons why entrepreneurs talk themselves out of ideas, or talk themselves out of taking that next step or pursuing that opportunity, because they don't have the entire roadmap mapped out. You were literally taking it day at a time and saying yes to things that you weren't ready for, putting yourself in opportunities or in positions that, like, maybe I would have said, oh, there's no way I can make that work, so I would never even be there. So I think there's something to be said about, like, finding that opportunity in the difficulties that you experienced that would maybe turn most people away.
Absolutely. And I think an important thing to remember within that too is all puns intended, that human to human aspect on it as well, is also people, I like to believe that people are inherently good. and they want to see you succeed, especially those underdogs. They want to be a part of your success. So people are there to help you. And by putting those relationships first, so making sure that even in taking those risks, like obviously I took on some of these things when I couldn't afford them, but I always found a way to pay people. I always made sure that people were full. I never asked for a discount. Unless I was going to make a way to make that up, but not short somebody else. I never asked for a favor. I made sure that I was showing up and taking responsibility. Also because I didn't know anything different in life. I grew up that way because I had to take responsibility for myself through these processes and through growing up really quickly and early. And so keeping that in mind, that people are inherently good and they want to help you, also helps you take that leap. Because I think often too, people forget that all business is a human to human interaction that results in a transaction. And people are so focused on that transaction when often traditional business training, not that I can really speak to that because I'm not sure exactly what that looks like, but traditional business training really talks about, the spreadsheets, the transaction, because that's what keeps you alive. But I'm not sure how much depth goes into the human to human interaction. And ultimately, when you're low and you're kind to people and people see something in you, they see that you're different, they want to help you. And that, honestly, that nativity of willing to take those leaps and risks and jumps, people wanting to help me and wanting to see a positive outcome, and really focusing on those human to human connections, never taking advantage of anybody, making sure that they're full. And sometimes that was hard. Sometimes it meant I was late. Sometimes it meant, people just really had to trust me. But I've never I've never shied away from that. I've always been focused on those human to human connections. And I think that ultimately allows you to get ahead, because at the end of the day, people want to help you.
There's normally a question that I ask at the end of every podcast, but I'm going to stick it in right here because I think it's very relevant to what you said about human to human interaction that results in a transaction. Where do you see business owners or entrepreneurs go wrong when it comes to their relationships, or when they're trying to negotiate partnerships or deals or opportunities or alliances or affiliate programs? Where do you see people go wrong when it comes to relationships in business?
Yeah, so I can say this because I can honestly say that when I started having more resources available to myself, and I feel like I've been jumping around a little bit, so I apologize for that.
This is great.
When I started having some more resources available to myself, I made a huge mistake. And it's something that I'm just now recovering from and changing my mindset on. And that's that you often think about what other people want or what the market might want, as opposed to your brand and what your brand stands for and what it's building. So often people, and I'm not saying don't do the research of what is happening in the marketplace, certainly do a market analysis for sure, but don't let that dictate the choices that you're making. So for example, you might see somebody with 1.5 million followers and you're like, oh gosh, I got to get my product in their hand and that's going to help me. And often when you have resources, you're looking at those numbers. You start thinking about those transactions. You start thinking about, okay, how do I increase my traffic? How do I increase these things? Instead of thinking about, what am I doing? What changes am I making? What am I innovating? What are my values? Does this align with my values? Does this align with my brand? Who is my brand? Is my brand male, female, transsexual? What is my brand? And I create its identity. And I think that equally as an entrepreneur, it's just as important to be developing your own identity at the same time. Because as you get to know yourself better, you become a better leader, you become a better partner, you become a better entrepreneur. And it allows you also to have capacity to mold and grow the identity of your brand. It's just like dating. Like, these partnerships are just like dating. If you get mismatched with the wrong values on a Bumble or a Tinder, the relationship's not going to work out, and you're not going to see the results that you want to see. It takes that true work on a relationship. It takes that true work on yourself to know who you are, to be able to be a good partner to somebody else, and vice versa, to see the results that you want to see. And so I think that people get really hung up on the data and the information, which is important, but it certainly, in my perspective, isn't the most important. And I think it's more important to take that time to really get to know yourself and to be patient, because revenue matters. And that's actually, I think, where things go off course, and where it did for me as well, is that when revenue starts mattering more and more, like when I did $18,000 a year, I was so happy. I was so happy. But then, fast forward, and $1 million doesn't make me happy. And it's because I lost myself. It's because I lost my passion. It's because I was doing, partnerships because of the clout within it, or because it was going to drive more traffic. But did it really drive my passion? Maybe not so much. And I think that's really the most important compass in any type of collaboration, or even investment, or any type of relationship that you're going to do in business. Is it going to drive my passion as the leader? Because if it's not, it gets into a really scary zone when, as the leader, you're starting to lose your passion. So I think that it's really important to align those relationships, so it keeps you, if you're a human, like if you're a person, I think that it's really important for you to keep driven by that.
I love that. And I think that's worth reiterating, like your happiness levels at $18,000 a year versus when you were making almost 100 times that, you were not as happy or fulfilled because you weren't the same you. You were changing, you had other priorities, you had to make more stakeholders happy, and there was more at stake, quite frankly, at that point.
Yeah, the more at stake meant that I felt a need to fulfill different things, and I put that own pressure on myself. Like, I can actually say none of my shareholders, all of them have been really unique and just incredible in terms of letting me do my own thing. But I put that pressure on myself to grow big instead of to grow with the same intentions I started with. And that took us off course. And then the minute that I start, re-identifying who I am, and in turn who Evio is, we always see a spike. It's actually, it's crazy how you can track that. And I mean, the data doesn't lie then within that too, because people will on our team will be looking at it, they'll be like, okay, what changed to see this spike? Let's try to recreate this spike. When really the only thing changed was my passion. So I think there's a science to that.
That's so fascinating. I'm going to selfishly ask you a question, because I love the way you talk about relationships. I love the way you talk about like brand partnerships and strategic alliances. And every time we've talked offline about how do you get in front of the right people or companies that you value. So I'm going to put you on the spot here for like a real life kind of case study slash, I just want to hear how you would go about it. So about Jube, I'm all about relationship. I'm all about bringing people together, creating company culture, working with brands that value their teammates, their employees, that know that culture is not a one and done. It's not something you just do once a week or once a quarter and call it a wrap. Culture is not, to me, it's embedded, right? It's embedded in your values. And there's many companies that I would love to work with. And I want to take your spin on this, because I love the way you go about negotiating and getting in the door with some of these companies. You've got very unique perspectives, and like you just have your own unique approach. Let's say I wanted to get with a company. Let's just say, I've been thinking about Allbirds a lot. I love Allbirds. Amazing shoes, amazing like founding story, just at how quickly they've grown, love their product. Like I wear my Allbirds 96% of my life, of my day. I have zero connection with somebody at Allbirds, not even remotely. How would you go about negotiating or getting in front of a company or a brand like that to get in the door? I just love the way your brain operates when it comes to this type of question.
I am so glad that you asked this question, because Yeah, this kind of stuff really excites me. Something that I didn't mention previously is that we do have a couple really unique partnerships and shareholders within Evio. So to people who are listening, I guess I'll precursor that because I know that that's why you asked. So Evio was actually the first company ever to do a deal with a publicly traded cannabis company. They were an $8 billion company at the time, and they were the largest in the industry, and they chose to seek out Evio. They approached us to do a deal, and we actually weren't taking investment at the time. And they convinced us to take their money, which is an interesting place to be because, I mean, as an entrepreneur, you're always raising money. You could always take on more money. But so I love that you asked that question in that frame because that was a unique experience. That was a unique opportunity. We had a number of different cannabis companies courting us, whom were all multi-million, billion-dollar companies. And here we were just like little Evio doing our thing. But they were approaching us, and we had multiple deals, which gave us a really great opportunity to negotiate the best deal. And also make sure that we could deliver on it and be a good partner within it. So leading that to your question, I really believe that it's like dating. And I think that you should never chase, ever. An amazing mentor of mine, Hugh Winters, actually said to me, one of the first times I met him, he said, never push on a string. And that really stuck with me in every corner of life, my personal life and in business, is never push on a string. Both people need to be pulling. And so I think that that's the best way to approach a relationship in business or a partnership is make it their idea. People are more eager, the relationship's going to be more successful, the collaboration's going to be more successful when both of you are pulling on the string. And so make them chase you. And so it's a long journey, but do breadcrumbs. And if they don't pick up the breadcrumbs, it's not the right relationship anyways. It's literally just like dating. Like, you don't want to be the person who's more in love than the other. Like it might be one day, you're more in love than the other person, but a good relationship has both people pulling on a string, both people showing up, both people communicating, both people really wanting to be there. It's the same thing in business. And so it needs to be both people's idea. Like, if it's just one person's idea, it's not going to be successful. That relationship, that person isn't going to be faithful in that relationship. So it's the same thing in business. It needs to be both people's idea. So what I did is I started to breadcrumb. I knew that we were really fortunate to have press on our side. So find out what your secret weapon is. And for us, a part of that was press. We got quite a bit of press because my story was different than any other story in the beauty industry at the time. So the press wanted to talk about it, to have something new to talk about, which meant that we formed some great relationships in the press without having PR or publicists or that extra cost. So this was free. This was completely resourcefulness. It was free. And so I started just, in any interview that I had, I would drop a crumb saying, I want to get into cannabis and beauty. I think cannabis and beauty is going to be a thing. And before you knew it, we had CBC mentioning Evio is getting into cannabis. We were this small company who, we were getting some traction in our own right. But as soon as the cannabis companies hear this, they're like, oh, new industry. That's a, $900 billion industry, beauty. And here's the first company to ever talk about this in the press. Interesting.
That's so mind-blowing. Oh my God.
They all start to approach you, and it now becomes their idea. And so I think I can actually remember when we first connected with Aurora, they called us like 3 or 4 times, and I was like, no, sorry, not interested. No, sorry, not interested. This was a huge company, and they ended up coming and presenting to us. And that was such a unique experience. And also then it was true to our values. We weren't getting into cannabis because it was the hot new industry. We were getting into cannabis because it helped us be kinder and more conscious, which is the whole mission of Evio, to create a kinder, more conscious future by becoming better versions of ourselves. And we were able to eliminate the use of animal byproducts and become completely vegan with the use of hemp. We were able to do a pilot to reduce the use of plastic by 40%. we were able to create more transparency in an industry that has none. So all of those things increased our value drive in our company to be kinder and more conscious. And so cannabis made sense to that. You can't just approach things because it's the new hot thing. Again, it needs to align, just like dating. Your values need to align, and your want to be there needs to align. So say if you wanted to approach Allbirds, I would find something unique that is relative to Allbirds and start dropping breadcrumbs. Start dropping them wherever your secret power is. Start dropping those breadcrumbs. Create some credibility for yourself in the space, and then figure out what kind of value you can give to them and wait for them to come. And if that value is right, then they'll approach you.
I love that. Breadcrumbs, making it their idea, unique perspective. I think that alone, if someone's listening to this and you're trying to get with a brand or a company that may not know you right now, but it's a company that you're inspired by, a company that you want to be a part of, whether it's from a partnership standpoint or you want to do work for them or vice versa. I think that's such a good idea. You've always said in our conversations, an idea is always easier when it's the other person's idea. And you're like, yeah, let's do it. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. So let's transition this into, so Evio now in 2020, I know you guys have a big presence in terms of your online community. You've got influencers, you've got affiliate programs, you do a lot from a community building standpoint. And I think you've said to me previously is that your community is almost like one of your secret weapons, right? It's like your community is very tight knit, the way you've cultivated it, your initiatives. Talk to me about the importance of what having a strong community for Evio has done for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that it's kind of like the saying goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I mean, a great example of that alone is we launched a mascara about a year ago, and our community trusted us enough and were vulnerable enough with us enough and felt close enough to us to, in a very gentle and kind way, tell us that it sucked. Mm. And that made a huge difference because we could then go back to the drawing board, make a better mascara, make one that, in that camaraderie of them trusting us with that information and being kind about it. And also then trusting us that they're telling us that information with the purpose that we're going to make it better. So not only is it super powerful from a marketing perspective, it's super powerful from a product dev perspective and just from an overall perspective within building a consumer-facing company. I think also, I mean, it's a direct link within that too. Previously, I was talking about how you see those spikes when, like, we were able to track those spikes where sometimes the only difference was my passion. And then there were times too where I really struggled with PTSD. And throughout that struggle, I didn't want to talk to people. I don't want to be social. I, wasn't so much of a people person that I once was before. And also sometimes, well, just getting to know yourself and learning yourself, which is an important part of the entrepreneur process as well. I'm the type of person, I retreat. I take time to be on my own to get to know myself better, and I don't become as interactive and social. And so we would see dips, but then as soon as we get interactive and social and we're out there with our community again, we see more spikes. And it's simply just fostering those relationships again, where innately people are good and they want to be a part of your success. They want to be a part of that uprise. They want to be a part of something. That's natural human in society behavior, is that we want to be a part of something. And I think also my story lends itself to that too, is that people can relate to it. Like I said, like, my story isn't that unique. What's really fascinating about this too, about our community and about Evio affiliates, and is that when I'm really active within it, we have dinners, and Jube has actually curated some of them, and our dinners are unlike other beauty industry dinners. When you come in, you put your phone in a bag. We don't want you to post about it. We don't want you to talk about us. We want to get to know you. And So often I share my story along with other people sharing their stories, and we find this commonality of a human to human connection, which often doesn't happen between a human and a brand. And that human to human connection is so powerful because on social media, you can track this pretty easily, is that on social media, individual pages, like on Instagram, for example, they have more comments, they have more genuine interaction, they have more of this camaraderie to them. Whereas brands to consumers tend to have a bit of a different dialogue happening. And so our goal within Evio is to be your best friend. And our whole mission is to create a kinder, more conscious future. We can't do that alone. We need that to be a collective, unified mission to create a kinder, more conscious future. And also to be really transparent about that we are not the kindest people. We are not the most conscious people. We make a lot of mistakes. But you know what? Let's do them out in the open. Let's make I love this saying too, let's make our skeletons dance, because that makes other people feel comfortable to do the same. And without having those messy conversations, we can't get to a kinder, more conscious place. And so we really value our community to have those open conversations and to find those commonality grounds of like, you know what, I've struggled with this, you know what, me too. Or also creating new empathy by understanding new people's struggles. That makes me a better leader. It makes Evio a better company. It makes us a better contribution to society, which I think is really important as a business owner. That is your responsibility, is to shape society. I think a lot of us forget just how much business impacts the world. And we've gotten a little bit of a taste of that during COVID. And so ultimately it's our responsibility, and you can't do that alone. Community is intertwined and injected in that. So really that's our mission, is to really get to know the people who make us. We're nothing without them, and vice versa. Society needs companies to operate and to create consumer packaged goods, to create experiences, to create. So we all have to live together, and I think community is such an important part of that.
Yeah, we could go down a huge rabbit hole of community and what the importance is from a ancestral and tribal standpoint of that need of belongingness, that connection, that wantingness to be a part of a tribe. But I think when you come together as a common unit in a cohesive manner with the same goals, the same objectives, I love that your dinners are untraditional. They don't have the photographer. They don't have that glam. I mean, when I think about a beauty company hosting a dinner for their best clients or their influencers, I think about like, I don't know, I see this as like a big party. I see it as like influencers, like paparazzi, like fancy food, like rosé and like calamari. And this is just me making stuff up on the spot. But what I loved about attending one of your dinners in the past was, yeah, that notion of everybody put their phone away in this Evio bag, which was out, like away from the conversation. It was nowhere near like our tables. It was on like on door hangers. And then you got into deep conversations right away. And you were sitting with a group of strangers, some you had never met before. Such a difference in like ages, in experiences, in terms of like life experience. Like, I was sitting next to, like, I was one of the oldest people at my table, and I was like 29. I was like, oh my God, like I feel old being here. Like there's so many youngsters around me. But when those youngsters, I'm calling them youngsters like I'm an old man now, but like they had some incredible stories. And when I opened up about not wanting to swim because I was overweight as a kid, and then a woman opened up about her not wanting to swim because of she got bullied, and I looked at her, I was like, what are you talking about? Like, you're a gorgeous individual. What you had the same struggles as me, being like it was such a different but same experience, and I would have never known that about her. Mm-hmm. I would have never known that about her.
Something that's really fascinating about this too is I love breaking stigmas. I love breaking those stats. I love changing the way people are thinking about things. And I had a stigma about influencers. I had a stigma about that Instagram personality. And by having these dinners, it changed my perspective. And I think that's so important. It really changed again, my level of empathy. And the reason why I keep mentioning that too is at a Forbes dinner that you also curated, we asked some of the brightest, most active entrepreneurs in the world on the Forbes 30 under 30 list. We asked them at a dinner, if you had a magic wand and you could, this was a question, it's a Jube question. Do you know what it was?
Yeah.
If you had a magic wand, and you had 3 things to create a more conscious future, what would you create? Across the board, number 1 was empathy. And so I think that's so important to our mission in creating that kinder, more conscious future, is that empathy. And by having these dinners, and like I had stigmas about influencers and this influencer personality, and I had empathy because I understood the process better. I also understood how the Instagram world has also been such an asset and such a hindrance. And so being able to have balanced conversations of not always like, oh my gosh, look at your trip, your Chanel purse, and you're this and that, and having this perception that everything's great can be kind of dangerous. And so let's have a conversation that, yeah, everything's great, but you know what? There's some things that also really have me down right now. And I think that human experience of balance is something that is often missing out of the beauty industry. And so having that in a welcoming, comfortable space, I think is so important. And that's how you truly build community. It's not somebody sharing our story on Instagram.
I love that. Yeah, it's not, community is so ingrained in like how people talk about you when you're not in the room, or how they're talking to their friends about Evio and what they're thinking. That's so fascinating. So I want to take this in one more direction before we wrap today. And it's a little bit about your past, but it's about also how you're using that presently. So this idea of resources versus resourcefulness, right? When you had $15 in a laptop, you had to get creative. You YouTubed how to use Photoshop, which is already like, wow, who does that? And like, you taught yourself, and now you're amazing at it because I've seen it. But how have some of those experiences from your past, like what role do they play in your life today? You said you're very comfortable having 10 cents in the bank to $1 million to 200,000 to $5 to $17. Like that contrast is insane. But what qualities do you think of like 7 years ago when you had to be beyond resourceful? What qualities still come up today, and kind of like what does Evio look like today from a resourcefulness standpoint, that where you're finding yourself like just having to adapt and pivot and become more resourceful than ever before?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because when 7 years ago when I was in the shelter and I had $15 in a laptop, I had nothing to lose. And so I was more creative. I was more innovative. I was challenging things. I was willing to try new things because I didn't care if they failed or not, because I had nothing to lose. And then once I had more resources, I often, I was then more scared to make mistakes because I had more to lose. And so I did a lot of hiring people whom I was like, they've done this before, they have it figured out, this is the answer. And no one has the answer. I was looking for not an easy way, but I was trying so hard to do the right thing that I forgot that there isn't really a right thing. This is a creation process. And there's no right way to do a creation process except for to get your hands dirty and get messy and try new things, make mistakes, and fail. And so when I had nothing, I was willing to fail. And when I had more, one of the biggest mistakes that I made was being scared to fail. And so that's something now that I'm shedding, especially, and I got to say, actually, COVID was a blessing to that, because we had to scale back. I had to get more involved in things again. And that was such a blessing because it sparked that creativity again. And so I know that they talk about to answer your question a little bit further, there's a book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. And he talks about wartime CEOs and peacetime CEOs. So something that I have really learned about myself is that I am a wartime CEO. And I take this out of the time in the shelter. And so it's something that I still have now and that I'm really grateful for. However, trying to change that inner dialogue about it, because I will, put myself in hard situations simply because it's where I know best, where I'm most comfortable, because I'm a wartime CEO and I get most innovative and creative when I'm in a tough situation. So that's something I take from that time that now really helps me. But also now trying to change that dialogue, because sometimes that's self-sabotaging. So yeah, trying to really just navigate, what are things from that time in my life that really served me and helped me get to where I am now, be grateful for them, learn a lesson from them, know when to, take that out of my tool belt, but also know when it's no longer serving me and just keep it tucked away. And that's a really hard thing to decipher, especially when you go from nothing to more than most very quickly. Is like you still have to unpack all of those guards and those tool belts that helped you be innovative in the first place. But what got you here is not going to get you there. And so it's a constant daily grind, and it's becoming comfortable in that daily grind and learning how to switch those dialogues that you're having with yourself, so that you're not self-sabotaging, things like that. So I think that's a really big part of the resources to resourcefulness, because going back to the whole lottery comment too, that's why a lot of people, when you win the lottery, you end up broke in a couple of years because you go back to what's comfortable unless you're doing that inner work. And so it's a constant battle, and that arrival syndrome, when you arrive to the place where now you have those resources, it doesn't necessarily mean success. You can fall from grace just as quickly as you got there. And in fact, a really good stat around that is, I don't remember the exact numbers, so forgive me on that, but venture capitalist fund companies that are venture capitalist fund early on in like the idea phase of their company, they fail at rapid paces. I mean, some of them succeed, but I think it's like somewhere around like 10% of them succeed. So a lot of people, when they talk about startups, they say, okay, what was the number reason why this startup failed? And they say, oh, we ran out of money. You didn't run out of money. Sorry to break it to you, honey, but you did not run out of money. You ran out of resourcefulness. You stopped being resourceful. Because if that was the case, these venture capitalist backed fund, like these companies, would have succeeded at a bigger rate because they had more money. But that isn't that stat doesn't exist. Like, companies that are venture capitalist backed aren't succeeding more quickly than those that are bootstrapped. So that's not the case. So resources is never the reason why a company fails. It's because you stopped being resourceful. And I think that's a huge thing to decipher, because sometimes when you're down and out and don't have the resources that you need, it's in your power to become more resourceful. But if you're giving all the power to the resources, forget it.
Mic drop. Forget it. I love it. All right, Brandi, that was incredible. I think the whole notion of resources and resourcefulness is one that will never go out of style, so to speak. It's something that's always going to be a thing. I've got a couple of rapid fire questions to bring this podcast episode to a close. Favorite book?
Ooh. The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz.
A word to describe your last week?
Growth.
Where do most people go wrong in relationships?
Arrival syndrome.
Future podcast guest that you think would be amazing for me to go after?
Ooh. You know what? This is just totally random, just popped into my head, but I would love to see you do an interview with like your grandma, asking like secrets of a happy life. Or like, one of my favorite things to do is to ask Uber drivers or concierges Often like relationships will come up in like an 8-minute drive or something. And often some of them have been married for like 35 years. And I'll ask, what's the secret to a long relationship? And they are the most epic conversations. I would love you to interview somebody who has lived a long life, maybe your grandma, and ask about that life cycle.
I love that. I love that idea. The typical responses I get are entrepreneur names or author names or CEOs. So that's really unique. I'm going to go after that. I think my grandma, we'd have to do it in a different language. We'd have to do it in Hindi, then transcribe it, but don't let that stop me. And then my last question, I think that's a great idea. Last question.
Grandma, if you'd like.
Last question. Tomorrow morning, the entire world wakes up, and for whatever reason, the entire world is looking at the exact same billboard. What would you write on that billboard for all of the world to see?
Practice empathy.
Practice empathy. I love it. Brandi, this was an incredible podcast, episode 5 of the Human to Human podcast. Is there anything you would like to say in closing?
No, I feel like I was very chatty today. Thank you so much for having me. And congratulations on your podcast. This has been really incredible. And I love what you're building. I'm so proud of you. And you're incredible. And you are a master at relationships, and something that I really admire the work and the effort that you put into every relationship that you have. So thank you so much for sharing this hour with me.
Appreciate it. Where can people connect with you?
Yeah, so check us out at eviobeauty.com. And yeah, we just launched a mascara today. So if you have a moment and you're in the market for it, go check it out. Let us know what you think. This was mascara 2.0, so we can't wait to hear what people think. And it's at eviobeauty.com.
And always, if you took one nugget out of this episode, one piece of idea, one piece of actionable advice, I would love to hear from you over at Let's Jube, and tag me and Brandi. Take a screenshot of this wherever you're watching it. Tag us on Instagram, send us an email, and we'd love to get back to you. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us for episode 5 of the Human to Human podcast. We'll talk to you later, Brandi.
Thanks for watching, guys.